Welcome to Dark Breathing, where doors close and silence begins. Before you surrender to the feeling of relaxation, if you find a sanctuary in our stories, feel free to support our channel with a like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, from which corner of the world are you listening tonight? And what does the hour feel like for you right now? These small details make us a true community. If you'd like to be the main character in one of my upcoming stories, just leave a comment with your name and the role you'd like to play. Do you want to be the hero who saves everyone? The villain? Or perhaps even the devil himself? So, subscribe to the channel and wait for your name in the next story. You'll find only a few ads in the first 15 minutes, then everything vanishes. After that, nothing will interrupt your journey into calm. I hope you give this experience a chance, for I am certain you won't find stories quite like these anywhere else. Now, dim the bright lights. Let the gentle hum of a water or the whisper of distant rain surround you, and don't let the thunder frighten you. Let's begin the journey. Story 1. That's how I knew I wasn't alone. I spent that weekend alone, in a house most people never noticed. It sat at the edge of town, where the road narrowed and the trees grew closer together, forming a wall of pine and shadow. There were other homes nearby, technically, but far enough apart that days could pass without seeing another person. No sidewalks, no streetlights, just forest, snow, and silence. I liked it that way. Winter had just settled in after a heavy snowfall, the kind that swallows sound, the kind that makes even familiar places feel distant and unreal. My house felt warmer because of it. Large windows, a stone fireplace, wood everywhere. A cabin, but not rustic. Comfortable. Intentional. That first night, nothing happened. I stayed up too late watching videos in the living room, half asleep by the time I turned the TV off. When I walked down the hallway to my bedroom, the house creaked softly the way it always did, adjusting to the cold. My bedroom sat at the very end of the hall. One entire wall was glass, floor to ceiling. A sliding door opened directly toward the woods behind the house. During the day, it was beautiful. At night, it felt like the house forgot which side I was supposed to be on. I turned off the lights and lay down. That's when I heard it. A crack. Not a branch snapping naturally. Not the distant sound of the forest settling. It was heavier, deliberate, like weight being placed where it shouldn't be. A few seconds passed, then another crack. I sat up slowly and looked toward the window. With the lights off, the reflection disappeared. I could see the trees clearly. Rows of tall pines standing motionless in the snow. I stared for a long time. And then something shifted. Not a shape, not a body, just darkness moving where darkness shouldn't move. Between two trees, as if something leaned forward, then pulled back. Everything went still again. I told myself it was nothing. My eyes adjusting, my imagination filling in gaps. Still, I didn't move for a long time. When I finally got up, I checked the sliding door. Locked, solid. I went back to bed. Sleep didn't come easily after that. The next day felt wrong in ways I couldn't explain. Nothing happened. No sounds, no movement. But everywhere I went in the house, I felt like I'd turned my back on something. I kept checking windows without meaning to. Not expecting to see someone, just expecting. By nightfall, snow started falling again. Thick, steady. It should have been comforting. Who would be out there in weather like that? Around 10, I was on the couch by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket. The TV casting a dull glow through the house. I didn't realize how dark it had gotten until I stood up to grab a drink. That's when I noticed the den light was off. It was a small room down the hall. Bookshelves, a chair. I always left that light on at night. Always. I flipped it back on without thinking much of it. When I returned to the couch, I unpaused the TV. Less than a minute later, I glanced over my shoulder. The light was off again. I stood up slowly. From where I was, I could see the switch. It wasn't just dark. The switch itself was flipped down. I didn't say anything. I didn't move toward the room. Something in my gut told me the light wasn't the point. I backed away. My phone was charging in my bedroom. My keys were by the front door. I needed both. Quietly, I moved down the opposite hallway and stepped into my bedroom. That's when I saw the footprints. They pressed into the fresh snow just beyond the glass. Coming from the woods. Stopping right at the window. I followed them with my eyes, up to a figure standing just a few feet away. A man. His face was swallowed by darkness, but I knew, without seeing his eyes, that he was looking directly at me. I ran. As I grabbed my keys, I heard footsteps. More than one. Moving fast along the outside of the house. I burst through the front door and sprinted toward my car. The engine started, just as someone rounded the corner of the house, running straight at me. I didn't look back after that. When police arrived later, the house was destroyed. Windows shattered. Furniture overturned. Doors ripped from hinges. It looked like rage had been unleashed inside. Like the house itself had been punished for something. I told them what I saw. One man outside. More than one set of footsteps. They never found anyone. I sold the house weeks later. Even now, what stays with me isn't the chase. It's this. I didn't hear anyone break in. And that means they didn't need to. Story 2. The Shadow of the Boy Who Vanished. It always begins with innocence. Or so we tell ourselves. My name is Elliot, and this isn't a story about friendship. This is a testimony of how darkness can wear the face of the handsome new kid at school. The year was 2008. I remember because phones still flipped. YouTube was a new thing, and we were all trying to figure out who we were. Then, he walked into my 7th grade English class. Marcus. Marcus was the kind of boy you noticed immediately. Long, sandy hair that fell over his eyes like a curtain. Tattered Monster Energy shirts. Jeans that looked like they'd survived a motocross crash. For the first week, he was a ghost. I'd see him sitting alone in the cafeteria, eating slowly, utterly separate. I watched him. The restless way he tapped his fingers. The way his eyes scanned the room, like he was looking for something or someone. Then I saw him one afternoon by the 6th grade lockers. He had a girl backed against the metal doors, his voice a sticky whisper. "Come on, don't be scared. It's just a kiss." My 12-year-old brain didn't register it as wrong. It looked daring. When he saw me watching, he turned, and he smiled. That smile, half a confession, half a challenge, was the first thread that pulled me into his web. The next day, he slid up to my locker. I was dying over a book report for Of Mice and Men. "Boring, right?" he said, pulling a notebook from his bag. "Here, change a few words. No one will know." He handed me his notes. He hadn't read the book, just a summary online. But in that moment, he was my hero. That was the beginning. We started hanging out. An outside bench at lunch. My house. He won my mom over, effortlessly. Compliments on her decor. Praising her cooking. Bizarrely detailed conversations about reality TV shows she loved. He was a charmer when he wanted to be. Then I started going to his house. His family was quiet, but the tension, it was like a fog in the rooms. I remember one afternoon, his mother, Sarah, a quiet woman with perpetually tired eyes, told us to go outside. Not Grand Theft Auto, all day, a beat of silence. Then, the eruption. Marcus turned and hurled the controller. Not through it, launched it. It hit her square in the forehead with a sick, wet crack. I was sent home immediately, walking down the driveway, his screams bleeding through the windows. Words no son should ever scream at his mother. The next day at school, he was waiting at my locker. "Sorry about that," he said, flat. Is your mom okay?" I whispered. "ER visit. Stitches." Then he added, his tone turning my blood to ice. Shame I had to do that just to get her to shut up. That's when everything shifted. My visits to his house became more frequent, and Marcus became cruel. He mocked my clothes, my music, my quietness. It was an erosion, layer by layer. Then came the night. He said he wanted to play a game. Hide-and-seek tag. In the dark. I was 14. It felt juvenile. But there was a glint in his eye that stopped my protest. We killed the lights. The house was dead. Unnaturally silent. I crammed myself into a shallow crawl space under the staircase, my body freezing from more than just the cold. I couldn't hear my own heartbeat. The air was thick and still. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Then A soft, creeping sound. Not footsteps. A slow drag, like fabric on carpet, right outside my hiding spot. My breath hitched. The hairs on my neck stood rigid. A whisper, so close it brushed my ear through the crack in the door. Found you. The door flew open, and in the absolute black, I saw the brief, cold gleam of metal. The popping sound was deafening in the silence. Sharp, rapid, violent. A stinging, biting agony erupted across my ribs, my arms, my neck. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My mind, white with panic, was sure I am being shot. This is real. He emptied the entire magazine of that BB gun into me at point-blank range. Then, the dragging sound again, as he walked away, leaving me curled and gasping in a cloud of pain and the smell of copper and gun oil. I left without a word. At school, his eyes followed me, a cold, possessive stare from across the hall. He'd try to call. I'd block the number. He'd approach. I'd walk the other way. Eventually, the stares stopped. He found other interests. Years passed. I tried to bury that version of my life. Then, a message from an old mutual friend. 3 words that made the world tilt. You heard about Marcus? The details were fragments, filtered through shock and gossip. A girlfriend, a raging argument, a last cigarette, a real gun this time, and a single point-blank shot to the head. She survived by some miracle, made a full recovery. Marcus didn't stick around to see it. He vanished into thin air that night. No trace, no sightings, just a cold case file and a family that doesn't speak his name. Story 3. He was already inside. I used to think the hardest part of living alone was the silence. After my wife moved out, the house felt too large for one person. Rooms I never used, doors I kept closed. Entire sections of the house I could go weeks without stepping into. It wasn't an old house. It wasn't broken. It was just empty. I told myself I'd grow into it. 2 years passed that way. Then, I brought the dog home. Her name was Willow. 8 months old, small, quiet. A rescue. She was energetic at the shelter, pulling at the leash, wagging her tail at everything that moved. The moment we stepped inside the house, that changed. She froze. Her ears flattened. Her tail dropped. She stood just inside the doorway, staring down the hallway, like she was waiting for something to move. I laughed it off. New space, new smells, new everything. I let her explore on her own and sat on the couch. She didn't make it far. Within minutes, she jumped up beside me and pressed herself into my side, shaking slightly. I could feel her heart racing through her chest. That night, she refused to leave me alone. The next morning felt normal enough. She followed me around while I made coffee, curled up beneath my desk while I worked, slept peacefully, from what I could tell. Around midday, she stood up suddenly. She walked to the doorway of my office and stopped halfway into the hall. Her body stiffened, ears forward, head tilted slightly, like she was listening. Then she walked out. I heard her nails clicking across the floor, moving away. 10 minutes later, she started barking. Not playful, not alert. Panicked, her barks echoed through the house, bouncing down corridors, making it impossible to tell where she was. I ran downstairs, calling her name, checking room after room, until I found her. She was standing in the center of an empty bedroom, just standing there, facing the wall. She wasn't barking anymore. She was shaking. When she saw me, she rushed to my side, pressing close, her eyes never leaving the room. There was nothing there. No sound, no movement. I closed the door and carried her back upstairs. That night, I woke up for no reason I could explain. Willow was standing at the bedroom door, not scratching, not whining, just staring at the crack beneath it. I called her name. She didn't move. I lay back down. I still don't understand why. The next day, everything unraveled. It was evening when I noticed she wasn't under my desk anymore. I called for her. No response. The house was silent in a way that felt deliberate. I found her downstairs, in that same room. The door was open. She was sitting in the far corner, trembling, staring toward the doorway I stood in. Something told me not to step closer. I turned around. At the far end of the hallway, near the stairs, someone leaned back out of sight. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Footsteps approached slowly, calmly. They stopped right outside the door. I held my breath. So did Willow. After a long time, the footsteps retreated. When I finally opened the door, the front door of the house was wide open. Police came. They searched the house and the surrounding land. They found where he'd been staying. An upstairs bedroom I never used, right next to my office. Food wrappers, blankets, personal items. The closet showed signs. Someone had been sleeping inside it. They said he could have been there for months. Sleeping during the day, moving at night, listening, watching. I sold the house. Willow came with me. She's never acted that way again. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about how close he was. Not breaking in. Already home. Story 4. The Silent Ward. What I found in the abandoned wing of St. Martin's Hospital. The year was 2002. I was 24, broke, and grateful for any work my uncle's window treatment company in Cleveland could throw my way. Most jobs were suburban homes or new office parks. But that Tuesday, the work order was different. St. Martin's Medical Center, West Wing. The lead maintenance man, Frank, met me at the loading dock. He was a heavy-set guy with a permanent squint and hands like worn leather. "Big load," he grunted, eyeing my van stuffed with industrial-grade metal blinds. He loaned me a heavy-duty cart, its wheels squealing in protest on the polished linoleum. "Wing's been closed for renovations," Frank explained as we navigated a labyrinth of echoing, bleach-scented corridors. Seismic retrofitting. Just finished. You're the pretty part. He led me to a massive, shuddering service elevator. The groan of its ascent was the last familiar sound I'd hear for hours. When the doors scraped open, the silence hit me first. Not peaceful silence, the thick, absorbent silence of a vacuum. I stepped into a long, rectangular central hall. To my left, weak autumn light bled through the windows of empty patient rooms lining the perimeter. To my right, the light died within 20 feet, swallowed by the mouth of a dark, U-shaped corridor. The place was a time capsule. The walls were that sickly pea-green glazed tile you see in old asylums. The floor was speckled vinyl, cracked and dull. The air was cold, stale, and carried a faint metallic scent under the new paint. Frank gestured vaguely. One blind per window. You'll find him. I'll be downstairs. Radio if you need anything. He started back toward the elevator, then paused, his hand on the gate. He looked back at me, and for a second, the gruffness fell away. His voice was low, almost paternal. You gonna be all right up here alone, kid? I puffed out my chest, the confident idiot I was. Yeah, Frank, no problem. He just nodded. The gate clanged shut, and the elevator whirred away. Its descent felt like an umbilical cord being cut. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was absolute and heavy. I decided to do a quick survey. The patient rooms were empty shells, just outlets and pipes poking from the walls. But as I approached the entrance to the dark, U-shaped corridor, my bravado evaporated. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light. It was a substance. It felt dense, cold. I stepped in. It was like walking into a static charge. Every hair on my body stood up. A jittery, sick energy buzzed in my teeth. Up my spine. The corridor was lined with open doorways, black rectangles leading into deeper black. I pulled my flashlight. Its beam was pathetic, carving a small, trembling circle in the gloom. I glanced into the first room. My light caught the outline of massive, rust-stained sink basins, chains dangling from the ceiling, and old, gutted cabinets. An operating theater, not a recovery room. A theater. A wave of pure, animal dread washed over me. I didn't just feel watched. I felt crowded. The certainty was immediate and icy. If I looked into another one of those rooms, something would be looking back. I abandoned the survey. I turned and walked briskly back toward the central hall, my neck prickling. Halfway back, I broke into a run, the cart rattling madly behind me. I had one blind to install in that corridor, room C12. The entire time I worked in there, drilling into the concrete frame, my back was to the open door. The feeling of a presence just behind me, in the threshold, was so intense I could almost feel its breath. I didn't turn around. I just worked, sweat freezing on my brow, my eyes locked on my hands, until I finished and fled back to the light. But the central hall wasn't safe. The noises began. noises began. Not the groans of an old building. These were isolated. A distinct, heavy footfall in an empty room down the hall. A sharp bang from inside a wall, like a pipe being struck with a wrench. A soft, rhythmic knocking from the ceiling above me. Then, clear as day, the sound of a metal bucket being kicked, skittering and spinning across a floor, somewhere in the dark U corridor. My voice was thin when I called out, "Hello?" Silence. The worst was the intercom. A tinny, very dark message text with, "The worst is the intercom." Distorted voice crackled from a rusted speaker grill in the ceiling. Syllables mashed and unclear, like a transmission from another decade. It happened twice. I was a coiled spring, jumping at shadows. Then, a miracle. "How's it coming?" I nearly wept with relief. It was Frank, emerging from the elevator with 2 coffees. He took one look at my face, pale, eyes wide, and his own expression sobered. "Things going okay?" he asked slowly. I tried to sound casual. "Yeah, just this old place makes some weird noises, huh?" He didn't smile. He set the coffees down. "What did you hear?" I listed them. The footsteps, the bang, the bucket. Frank's face went grim. I told management they shouldn't send people up here alone. Not since the electrician. "What electrician?" "Guy last week, rewiring some of those old OR lights in the dark wing. Said something came up behind him, breathing right on his neck." He said it, growled, low, like a dog. He left his tools right there on the floor and quit. Frank looked toward the black mouth of the U corridor. This wing, it wasn't always for vets. During World War II, this was the trauma and experimental surgery ward. They didn't always have enough anesthetic. They say the pain, it soaks into the walls. Thousands didn't walk out of those rooms. They never really left. The casual horror in his statement froze me. The bangs weren't pipes. They were echoes. The footsteps were reminders. The dark corridor wasn't just dark. It was a reservoir. Frank left me again, but his confession had changed the air. The place felt acknowledged now, its secret named. The rest of the afternoon passed in an eerie, watchful quiet. The noises stopped. The feeling of being watched lessened, replaced by a deep, melancholic cold. When I finally wheeled my cart back onto the elevator, the weight that lifted wasn't just physical. I drove home in a daze, overwhelmed by a fatigue that went straight to my bones. I was asleep before sunset, a deep, dead sleep, haunted by dreams of green tiles and distant, rhythmic scraping. I never took another job at St. Martin's. I heard they sealed the West Wing again a year later, citing structural concerns. But Frank's words and the feeling of that dense, charged darkness at my back in room C12 are structural to me now. They are the foundation of a certainty. Some places don't just remember their past. They actively and sometimes angrily live in it. Story 5. A childhood haunting. Growing up in the high desert of New Mexico, ghost stories weren't just campfire tales. They were local history. The land held memories in its rocks and arroyos, and some houses held more than others. By the time I was 11, I was a certified coward. My imagination permanently dialed to terror by a steady diet of cheap paranormal magazines. Then we moved to the house in Socorro County, and my fears found a home. The realtor used polite words like versatile history and unique prior usage. We learned the truth from a gossiping neighbor. For decades, before the proper funeral home was built across town, this very house had been used by the local mortician. It was a place for viewings, for preparation, a way station for the dead. Knowing that seeped into everything. The house wasn't that old, but it sounded ancient. At night, it settled with a distinct, measured cadence of footsteps on its original pine floors. Not random creaks, steps. From the empty hallway to my closed bedroom door, where they'd stop. My mother, a woman of eclectic spiritual interests, didn't help. She'd host seances in our living room for my older sister Leela and her giggling, nervous friends. They'd use a Ouija board from the flea market, and shrieks would inevitably pierce the night, followed by my mother's serious, hushed voice discussing energies. It fueled the dread, making the house feel awake and attentive. The incident happened in the fall of 1994. The annual county fair was in town. A swirling chaos of neon lights, diesel fumes, and cotton sugar. I went with my friend, Ben. My sister Leela went with her own crowd. My mother took my toddler sister, Maya, in her stroller. Ben and I, dizzy from rides and sick on candy, decided to head back early. He walked me to my front door, a lone rectangle of darkness in the quiet night. We said our goodbyes, and I enacted my nightly ritual. I never just walked in. I'd reach my arm through the cracked door, fumbling blindly for the bank of light switches in the foyer. Click, click. The living room and dining room lamps flared to life, pushing the shadows back into the corners. Only then would I enter, quickly scanning the now illuminated rooms. Clear. The house was silent, but it was the heavy, waiting kind of silence. I checked the kitchen. Empty. I padded down the hall, the old floorboards groaning under my weight like accusations. My mother's room was dark, vacant. I moved to Lila's doorway. The hall light cut a yellow wedge across her floor, landing on her bed. The covers were pulled up in a distinct person-sized mound, and it was moving. A slow, rhythmic rise and fall. I could hear it too, a deep, husky sound of respiration, the kind someone makes in a profound, untroubled sleep. Lila must have come home early, I thought, relieved. Her presence, even asleep, dispelled some of the house's oppressive loneliness. Not wanting to wake her, I tiptoed in. My priority was the windows, two large old sashes that led to the side yard. I checked each brass lock, securely fastened from the inside. Satisfied, I crept back out and went to my own room. I left my lights off, comforted by the glow from the hall and the living room, and by the audible, breathing proof that I wasn't alone. I climbed into bed, and the exhaustion of the fair pulled me towards sleep. I was in that fuzzy, hypnagogic state when I heard the front door open and the familiar sounds of my mother returning. The stroller wheels, the jingle of keys, Maya's fussing. Mom went straight to the kitchen. I heard the clink of a bottle being prepared. Then her footsteps approached my room. "Is Leela home?" she whispered from the doorway. "Yeah," I mumbled, half asleep. "She's in her bed. Out, cold." Mom nodded and retreated. The house was so acoustically alive that you could hear a page turn from 2 rooms away. The silence was total again. I was just dipping back under the waves of sleep when her footsteps returned, faster and harder this time. My door flew open, and the overhead light blinded me. "Where is she?" My mother's voice was sharp, angry. I blinked, confused. "In her room, asleep." "Leela is not in her room. Are you covering for her? Did she sneak out?" Her anger was tinged with real worry now. The bed was made, not just empty, but meticulously made. The quilt was smooth and taut, the pillows plump and undisturbed. No dent in the mattress, no impression of a head. It was a museum display of a bed, untouched by human form. My breath vanished. I lunged for the windows, my fingers fumbling at the locks. Still fastened, solidly, inside. My mind short-circuited. The logic was impossible. The shape, the breathing, the weight I had seen. It had been real, but the evidence before me was irrefutable. "Well?" my mother demanded, hands on her hips. "Where is she?" I could only point a trembling finger at the perfectly made bed. My voice was a dry rasp. It was right there. You're playing a trick on me, right?" Her eyes narrowed. "I'll play a trick on your backside if you don't start telling the truth." At that precise moment, we heard the front door open and Leela's voice call out, "Hello, I'm home." She walked into the hallway, her face flushed from the night air, smelling of popcorn and cigarette smoke from her friends. The subsequent yelling is a blur, but I stopped it, stepping between my mother and my bewildered sister. My voice, for the first time that night, was clear and dead serious. "Stop. Listen to me. There was something in Leela's bed. That's why I thought it was her. It was the shape of a person. It was breathing. I saw the blankets move. I heard it. And it wasn't Leela, because she just walked in the door." The anger on my mother's face faltered, replaced by a flicker of something else. A dawning recollection of every seance, every spooky story she'd ever encouraged. Leela just stared at the empty, pristine bed, her color draining. "I'm not sleeping in there tonight," I stated. It wasn't a request. Leela opted for the couch. My mother, though still not fully believing, didn't argue. I had to stay in my room. I spent the night staring at the slice of light from the hallway coming under my door. listening to every groan of the house, every tick of the settling pipes. I never saw the thing in the bed again. But I knew, with a certainty that has never left me, what I witnessed. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't my imagination. Something in that house, in that room that had once held the still and silent dead, had learned to mimic the living. It had lain down, pulled up the covers, and practiced the slow, steady rhythm of a sleeping girl's breath, waiting, perhaps, for someone to come close enough to see. Story 6. Something was matching my steps. I was 18 when it happened. My parents were out of town for a couple of days. Nothing unusual. I'd stayed home alone plenty of times before. The house was in a quiet suburb. Rows of similar homes, trimmed lawns, streetlights that turned on at the same time every night. Safe, predictable. That morning, I stayed in bed longer than I should have, watching TV and scrolling on my phone. When I finally went downstairs to make breakfast, my phone buzzed. A text from my friend. "Who's the guy outside your house?" I stared at the message, confused. Then I walked to the front window. There was no one there. No car. No movement. Just an empty street. I texted back, "What guy?" A moment later, I called him. He wasn't joking. He said he saw a man standing near my house, moving slowly from window to window, like he was trying to look inside without being noticed. He only texted me because the guy didn't look familiar, and because it didn't feel right. By the time I checked again, the man was gone. We brushed it off. We got on a call, played games for hours, but the idea never really left my head. It was already dark when we logged off. I went downstairs to make dinner. The house felt quieter than usual, too still. While I was at the stove, I saw a shadow slide across the wall in front of me. I turned around immediately. Nothing. The living room was empty. The window showed only darkness. I told myself it was a passing car, headlights, anything reasonable. Still, I turned on every light downstairs. I took my food upstairs and ate in my room, the TV lighting the walls in soft flashes. At some point, I noticed how dark the hallway outside my door was. No light bled through the crack underneath. That bothered me more than it should have. I paused the show and opened the door. The hallway was empty. I turned on the lights anyway, all of them. Downstairs too. I left them on when I came back up. Halfway up the stairs, I stopped. I had heard something. Footsteps. Not behind me, with me. I took another step. So did the sound. Same timing, same rhythm. I stopped completely. The sound stopped too. My heart started pounding. I stood there, listening, barely breathing. Then I took a step backward. The sound stepped backward. It wasn't echo. It was too precise. I ran. I locked myself in my room and called the police. While I waited, I called my friend. I told him what I heard. He went to his window across the street. trying to see something, anything. A minute passed. Then he said, "Oh shit." He told me he saw a man climbing out of the side window of my house, running toward the trees. The same man from earlier. The police arrived soon after. They searched the house, found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No one inside. Just an open window. They told me something that made my stomach drop. There had been another call a few weeks earlier. Nearby neighborhood. Similar description. A man watching a house. Waiting. I stayed with my parents after that. Even now, years later, there's something I still think about. When I was standing on the stairs, frozen in place, whatever was with me didn't rush. It didn't run. It waited. As if it was listening too. Story 7. The Coffin Scratches. A family secret unearthed. Deep in the pine-forested hills of rural Guatemala, in a time when calendars still read in the early 1940s, my family lived in a world governed by soil, superstition, and silence. Our small village was a cluster of homesteads, each with its own patch of land for corn and chickens, each shadowed by the immense whispering woods. In such places, death had a familiar face, one usually preceded by illness or age. But the death of my great-great-uncle, Emiliano, wore a mask. He was a robust man, a farmer with hands like knotted oak. He went to bed one evening, complaining of nothing more than a weariness from the day's labor. By morning, he was cold and still. No fever, no pain, no last words. The village doctor, a weary man with limited tools, pronounced it a sudden failure of the heart. The shock was a physical blow to the family. In the humid heat, tradition demanded haste. They buried him the very next afternoon in the family plot. A cleared patch of earth at the tree line behind the house. The pine box seemed too simple a container for such a vital man. The earth swallowed it too easily. Life in our home, as in all homes there, required a negotiation with the dark. Since we had no indoor plumbing, the outhouse stood a solemn, lonely 40 meters from the back door, a path that wound past the freshly turned earth of Emiliano's grave. That first night, the silence after the mourners left was absolute. My grandmother, who was just a little girl of 7, awoke with a pressing need. Bravery was a luxury she couldn't afford. Necessity propelled her. She padded out into the ink-black night, the only light coming from a sliver of moon caught in the pines. As she passed the burial plot, a sound froze her mid-step. Not an animal, not the wind. It was a thud, muffled, deep, originating from under the earth. Then a pause, then another. Thud. Then, woven between the impacts, a sound that was almost human, a choked, distant moan that rose into a ragged, smothered scream. Every child in those mountains grew up fearing the ghostly wails of La Llorona, the weeping woman. this was different. This wasn't a spirit's lament. This was a sound of raw, desperate, physical terror emanating from the ground. She didn't run. She flew, her nightgown whipping around her legs, bursting into the house to shake her parents awake. "Poppy, the ground! Tio Emiliano, he's screaming!" Her father, exhausted with grief, dismissed it as a nightmare, a child's imagination poisoned by the day's sorrow. "It is the wind in the trees, mija, or your ears playing tricks. Go back to sleep." But sleep was impossible. The house, once a shelter, felt thin and transparent. As she lay trembling, the sounds continued in her mind. Or were they still in the air? A relentless, rhythmic pounding, a frantic, scraping noise. She buried her head under the pillow, but the vibrations seemed to come up through the floorboards. Hours later, the need returned. This time, terror outweighed all bodily function. She woke her older brother, Matteo, a practical boy of 12. "You have to come with me. You have to listen." Annoyed but protective, he agreed. Together, they made the journey. The night was colder now, the moon hidden. The world was a tapestry of black shapes. As my grandmother hurried into the outhouse, Matteo waited outside, arms crossed. Then his posture stiffened, his head cocked. From the direction of the grave, it came again, a definitive, solid bang against wood, followed by a guttural, weakening cry that was unmistakably human. It wasn't a ghost. It was a man, trapped and fighting. They stumbled back to the house together, a unified front of pure panic. This time, when they woke their parents, the fear on Matteo's face, a boy not given to fantasy, eradicated all doubt. Their mother crossed herself, her face ashen, their father's expression hardened into grim resolve. He knew. Without a word, he went to the tool shed and grabbed 2 lanterns and 2 spades. He walked down the lane to his younger brother's house and pounded on the door. Minutes later, the 2 brothers, their faces etched in the flickering lantern light, stood over the disturbed earth of their brother's grave. They began to dig. The work was brutal, a macabre reversal of the day's sacred duty. The damp clay fought them, clinging to their spades. It took an agonizing hour to reach the lid of the pine box. The wood was scarred and filthy. With a shared, horrified look, they pried the lid open. The smell was not just death, but effort and panic and spent air. Emiliano was not on his back as they had laid him. He was face down, his hands curled into ruined claws at his sides. Gently, dreadfully, the brothers turned the heavy body over. A collective gasp, sharp and pained, cut the night. Emiliano's face was a mask of agony and self-inflicted ruin. Deep, ragged furrows ran from his forehead to his jaw, where his own fingernails had torn at his skin in the darkness. His neck and arms were a canvas of bloody scratches and bruises. The interior of the coffin lid was a testament to his final, frantic hour. Splintered wood was stained with blood and skin, and a central area was battered, almost thin enough to break through. He had woken in the absolute dark. in the suffocating silence of the earth, and had fought with the strength of a doomed animal to escape his own tomb. The pounding, the screaming, it had all been real. They stared, not at a peacefully deceased uncle, but at a man who had died a second, far more terrible death from sheer terror, a burst heart, or the slow, cruel theft of his last breaths. They would never know what cataleptic trance or rare sickness had mimicked death so perfectly the day before. They only knew the truth they had buried. They closed the coffin. They refilled the grave. And they carried the vision of those claw-marked walls and that ravaged face back into the house, where it became a silence thicker than any they had known before. A family heirloom of horror, passed down in whispers, a permanent scar on our history. The ghost they learned to fear wasn't in the woods. It was in the awful, echoing knowledge that sometimes the dead are not gone when we put them in the ground. Sometimes they are just beginning to fight. Story 8. When my online stalker stepped out of the screen. 6 years ago, my world was a delicate mobile, each piece suspended in careful balance. My new son, my work as a digital illustrator, my health, a marriage learning its new shape, my tether to the outside world, my solace and my social life was a glowing screen. Facebook, Instagram, a curated gallery of connections. That's where he found me. A friend request from Daniel, an old high school acquaintance. The profile picture was a scenic mountain view. We had a handful of mutual friends. I clicked accept. For months, he was a ghost in my feed. Then, a direct message. Hey, long time, how's life? The conversation was pleasant, if a little off. The cadence was wrong. The memories were vague. A cold suspicion formed. This wasn't the Daniel I remembered. But our mutual friends were real, and his messages were, at first, just awkward, harmless. I was polite but distant, a busy mom ending chats with nap time or deadline. Then, the first boundary fell, a text message to my personal number. How did you get this? I typed back, my thumb trembling. Your artist website, he replied. It was true. My contact page listed it for commissions. My professional life had given him a key to my private one. The texts became a torrent, several a day. I built walls with my replies, with family, at work. He then offered a shield of his own. He told me about his new boyfriend, declaring himself one of the few gay conservatives. I saw it as a peace offering. I'm happy for you, I said, hoping it would anchor him in a reality that didn't involve me. I was wrong. It became a ranting platform. Aggressive, hard-right politics flooded my messages. I drew my line. I'm a liberal. Let's not talk politics. The digital mask began to crack. The messages curdled, turning explicitly, graphically sexual. Descriptions of sex parties, deviant fantasies. I told him it was inappropriate. I was ignored. One hectic workday, I left my phone charging. I returned to an avalanche, dozens of messages, escalating from petulant anger to seething rage to vile, explicit narratives. My skin crawled. The politeness I'd worn as armor shattered. "I've been polite because you seemed lonely," I wrote, my fingers cold and steady. "This ends now. I don't believe you're gay. I believe you're dangerous. Do not contact me again." I blocked him. On everything. Facebook, Instagram, his number. I breathed for 2 days. Then the Hydra sprouted new heads. Friend requests from accounts with stock photo faces and no mutual friends. Texts from numbers 1 digit off from my own. Calls that rang once and stopped. I became a digital janitor, sweeping up his debris daily. I warned my friends, my family. They all had the same story. They'd accepted his request, but never really knew him. He was a phantom in our network. The siege lasted for months. A drip feed of dread. "Hey, stranger, you can't ignore me forever." The distance, he lives states away, was my only comfort. Then the floodgates burst. One evening, my phone erupted. Notifications screamed. Unknown numbers called back to back. I opened my professional art page to a digital massacre. 15 different accounts had vomited across my portfolio. Obscene images, accusations that I was a thief, a whore, a fraud. My livelihood defiled, and in his rage, he'd made a mistake. One comment came from his real, original account. He'd forgotten I hadn't blocked him there. It was followed immediately by a private message. "Sorry for that. I miss my friend. I just wanted your attention." My blood turned to ice. This was no longer harassment. This was an assault. I filed a police report. The officer was sympathetic, but useless. The laws, he explained, were miles behind the crime. A paper shield against a digital knife. That night, sleep was impossible. A primal anxiety held me awake. At 2:17 a.m., I gave up, scrolling my phone in the dark of my bedroom. My husband slept soundly beside me. Our son was down the hall. That's when I heard it. A soft, wet sound from the far end of the house. Our home was a long, sprawling ranch, and the living room felt a continent away. Scritch, scrape, a quiet crack. The cats, I thought, probably a mouse in the wall. I padded down the long, dark hallway, the hardwood cold under my feet. The sounds grew clearer as I approached the living room archway. Not animal sounds. The sound of pressure, of friction against old wood. I flicked the light switch. Silence. Instant and absolute. The room was empty, but the large floor-to-ceiling window, the one that opened from the top with a cumbersome crank, was ajar. A fresh, cold breeze snaked into the room. The ancient, painted-shut lock was splintered, hanging by a screw. Someone had forced it. The window was only open about 8 inches. The warped frame had resisted, but the gap was a black, grinning mouth in the night. They hadn't gotten in, but they had been there. Their hands had been on my window. Their breath had fogged the glass. I woke my husband with a choked whisper. We pulled our son from his crib and huddled in the locked bathroom. My phone pressed to my ear as I whispered to the 911 dispatcher. I knew. With a certainty that hollowed me out, I knew it was him. The digital fury, the physical attempt, they were chapters in the same story. The police found nothing but the broken lock. They spoke to Daniel. They couldn't prove it, but the visit, the cold blue lights in my driveway, must have scared him back into the shadows. For a time. Terror is a motivator. In the sleepless days that followed, I became a detective. I dug through the digital grave he'd left behind. I found his YouTube channel. It was a window into the mind of the thing at my window. It was a gallery of rage. He'd film himself in his car, face flushed and sweating, delivering slurring, hate-filled monologues. He'd rant about women who ignored him, about liberals, about betrayal. Then he'd smile, hold up a pistol, and clean it slowly, lovingly, while staring into the camera. Using details from his rants, I found his real name. A single Google search later, the final piece of the nightmare clicked into place. An arrest report from 2 years prior. He'd lured a woman to a hotel under false pretenses, locked her in the room, and assaulted her. She'd escaped with a split lip and a terror that mirrored my own. We moved within the month. I erased my digital footprint, scrubbing my number from the internet, locking my profiles into maximum security fortresses. I sleep when I can, with a baby monitor's audio trained on my son's room. The little green light, a sentinel in the dark. His YouTube channel is gone. The silence has held for years, but the window, that 8-inch gap between the safety of my home and the infinite dark outside, is never truly closed. It's always there, in the back of my mind. A reminder that some monsters don't just live online. They learn your address. And sometimes, they come to the window, just to see if it will open. Story 9. The passenger. The man who got in at the stop sign. Childhood memories are fragments, sharp and bright, or worn smooth by time. But some are preserved whole, suspended in a kind of emotional amber. This one is from the summer of '88. I was 9 years old. My mother, Eleanor, was driving us home from somewhere. A grocery run, maybe. A visit to a friend. The destination is lost. The journey is etched in stone. We were on one of those long, lazy back roads that weave through the Ohio countryside. The kind where stop signs feel like a suggestion to the landscape, rather than a command. Our old station wagon, wood paneling fading, rolled to a halt at one such intersection. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. I remember the quality of the light. Late afternoon, golden and thick, pouring through the windshield. I was in the back seat, a world of my own. I caught my mother's eyes in the rearview mirror. She had this soft, absent smile, a look of pure, uncomplicated love she'd get just watching me exist. It was a quiet pact between us, a moment of peace in the bubble of our car. Then, the fracture. Her smile didn't fade, it shattered. Her eyes, locked on mine, widened with a dawning horror so profound It seemed to drain the color from her face. Her gaze jerked from my reflection to the space beside me, to the window behind my shoulder. A half-second later, I heard it. The heavy, metallic clunk of the rear passenger door latch releasing. I turned, not in fear yet, but in simple childhood surprise. The door swung open, flooding the cabin with the smell of hot asphalt and dry grass, and he entered. He didn't climb. He inserted himself into our world with a weary, practiced motion. A man with long, matted hair the color of dirt and ashes, strands of it plastered to a leathery, sun-ravaged neck. It wasn't styled dreadlocks. It was neglect, woven into thick, greasy cords. He wore the remains of clothes, jeans torn at both knees, the frayed ends knotted together with clumsy string, and heavy boots so decayed the cracked leather peeled back like dead bark, revealing filthy, calloused toes. He settled into the seat beside me, the springs groaning under his weight, and he brought with him an atmosphere, a smell of old sweat, damp earth and something sour, like forgotten milk and gasoline. It was a physical presence, that odor. It coiled in the air, making my eyes water. I saw my mother's hand flutter to her face, her knuckles brushing her nostrils. But more unsettling than his appearance or his smell was his demeanor. Absolute, glacial calm. He didn't look at me. He barely looked at my mother. He stared straight ahead through the windshield, as if he'd simply boarded his daily commute. "Drive, please," he said. His voice was a dry rasp, like stones rubbing together. Not aggressive, not pleading, instructional. "Get out of my car." My mother's voice was high, thin, a tremor undermining its command. She was the gentlest soul I've ever known. Her anger sounded like a plea. He didn't acknowledge her. He simply repeated, quieter, "Just up the way." A silent communication passed between my mother and me in the mirror. A calculation of risk, of the empty road, of me so close to him. I pressed myself against my door, making my small body even smaller, my gaze fixed on my knees. I wasn't consumed by terror, not in the way you might think. It was a cold, buzzing curiosity. Who was he? The rule was so fundamental. Don't get in cars with strangers. But what about when the stranger gets in with you? I felt the lurch as my mother shifted the car into drive. We pulled forward, the normalcy of the motion absurd against the violation happening within it. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and my mother's sharp, shallow breaths from the front seat. Every muscle in her body was taut, a live wire of maternal fear. He didn't speak. He just watched the fields and fence posts slide past. For 5 minutes, maybe 10, an eternity, we drove like that. A dysfunctional family on a silent, hellish trip. Then he moved. He leaned forward slowly, his soiled hand resting on the door handle. His eyes scanned the passing weeds at the roadside. Here, my mother didn't hesitate. She wrenched the steering wheel, sending the station wagon skidding onto the gravel shoulder in a cloud of dust. The car was still rocking when his door swung open. He was out in one fluid, startlingly quick motion. He didn't look back. He didn't say a word. He just vanished into the tall grass by the roadside. His form swallowed almost instantly. He hadn't even closed the door. Before it could swing shut on its own, my mother slammed her foot on the accelerator. The wagon leapt back onto the pavement with a squeal of tires. The momentum whipped the open door shut with a deafening, definitive bang. A second later, I heard the beautiful, mechanical chorus of all 4 door locks plunging down at once. Thunk, 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 thunk. The seal had been restored. The bubble was reinflated. But the air inside was forever changed. It still held, for miles, the ghost of that sour, earthy smell. And it held a new, cold knowledge that the boundaries of your world, the doors you lock, the rules you follow, are only as strong as the willingness of the outside to respect them. And sometimes, at a lonely stop sign on a golden afternoon, the outside simply gets in and tells you to drive. Story 10. The white van. The night we were hunted in the grocery store parking lot. It was a Tuesday night last October. The kind of evening where darkness falls early, swallowing the world in a cold, ink-blue blanket. My fiancée, Chloe, had just finished her shift at the clinic. I was coming from a late meeting downtown. We were 2 tired women, trying to coordinate the mundane chore of groceries before collapsing at home. Chloe texted me she was stopping at the Fresh Value Market off the Interstate 70 exit. It's one of those standalone neighborhood grocers, well lit, but isolated. Its vast parking lot, a concrete island between the rushing highway and a quiet residential area. I told her I'd swing by the bank and meet her there. I was just pulling out of the ATM lane when my phone buzzed. Not a casual update. A tremor. I think I'm being followed inside the store. Every nerve in my body went taut. I typed back, demanding details. My heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Do not leave the store. I'm coming. I'll pull up front. We'll get you to your car together, or you get in mine. Her replies came in staccato bursts. 2 men, in every aisle, always a few feet behind, not shopping, just orbiting, staring with a flat, assessing gaze that made her skin crawl. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'm just paranoid. It's a small store, but the pattern was a predator's pattern. Trust your gut, I texted, my fingers flying. Find an employee, now. Before I could reach the interstate on-ramp, another message. At checkout, they followed me here. Went to self-checkout next to me. No items. They grabbed a pack of gum just to look like they're buying something. They're just standing there, staring, waiting for me to finish. The casualness of that detail, the performative purchase, chilled me more than anything. This was calculated. Check out slowly, I instructed. I pushed my car harder, the city lights blurring into streaks. I swerved into the Fresh Value lot just as her final text arrived. They took their bag and left the store. Relief was premature and short-lived. As my headlights swept across the front of the building, I saw them. 2 men, exactly as she'd described, lurking in a shallow architectural recess beside the automatic doors. They weren't leaving, they were hiding. One would lean out, peer into the store, then duck back. They were hunters at a blind, waiting for their quarry to emerge. I didn't think. I acted. I pulled my car directly in front of their hiding spot, maybe 10 feet away. I rolled down my passenger window, and I stared. I made my gaze a weapon. I locked eyes with the taller one, then the other. I didn't blink. I wanted them to see a witness. I wanted them to know their faces were being seared into a memory. They shifted uncomfortably, looked away, then back. Confusion and irritation replacing their predatory focus. I texted Chloe, "Do not go to your car. They are waiting by the door. Walk straight to my car. I'm out front." As if sensing the game had changed, the two men broke from their post and began walking, not to a vehicle, but deliberately into the heart of the parking lot. I watched, my blood turning to ice, as they beelined for a distinctive vintage green hatchback, Chloe's car. On the way, the one carrying the Walmart bag simply opened his hand, letting it drop to the asphalt. The gum purchase, its purpose served, was discarded. One man positioned himself in the shadowy gap between Chloe's car and the SUV next to it. He crouched low by the rear bumper, becoming nearly invisible. The other walked briskly to a white panel van parked 3 rows over. A classic, unmarked work van with windows painted black and no license plate. He spoke to someone in the driver's seat. A moment later, the SUV next to Chloe's car pulled away. The white van immediately glided forward, slipping perfectly into the vacant spot, now flanking her driver's side door. A trap. A perfect, horrifying trap. The van was the cage. The man hiding by the trunk was the spring. "They're at your car with a van," I called her, my voice low and urgent. "Walk to me. Do not look over. Just come." The automatic doors slid open. Chloe emerged, arms laden with grocery bags, her face pale in the fluorescent light. The crouching man saw her. He sank lower. The van's engine was idling a low, patient rumble. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight to my car, yanked the door open, and threw the bags in the back. As she slid into the passenger seat, I saw the crouching man stand up in my rearview mirror. He exchanged a look with the van, then both men walked toward it. I didn't wait. I slammed the car into drive and peeled out, swinging wide to pass behind the van, desperate to catch a plate number I already knew wasn't there. The rear was blank, just smooth, white metal. We didn't go home. We drove in aimless, evasive patterns for 40 minutes, watching every mirror, turning down random streets, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Chloe was in shock, clinging to the idea of coincidences. Maybe they liked her car. Maybe they were just weird. But the theater of it, the chilling, coordinated choreography, left no room for doubt. I wanted to call the police. She was adamant we had no proof, just a story. I regret that weakness every day. The epilogue came 3 weeks later. I was turning onto a quiet side street in the neighborhoods behind that Fresh Value. A white panel van passed me, going the opposite direction. A ladder was strapped to its roof now, a cheap prop to complete its disguise. The passenger window was down, and I saw them, the same two men. The driver glanced at me as they passed. Still no plates. I hit the gas, took 4 random turns, and sped home. My heart threatening to crack my ribs. I thought about calling the police then. But what was my report? I saw a van driving legally down a street? The rationalizations Chloe used that night sometimes whisper to me in quieter moments. Maybe it was all a monstrous misunderstanding, but deep in a place beyond reason, I know the truth. We weren't paranoid. We were prey. And on a cold October night, in a well-lit parking lot that felt like the loneliest place on earth, we only escaped the hunt because we happened to have a second set of eyes watching from the shadows. The white van is still out there, and it's still hunting. The only thing that changed is now we know to look for it. Story 11. The Prophet in the Pew. The man who warned me before his funeral. The year was 2009. I was 15, awkward, and found my social refuge in the only place my parents insisted on, our sprawling evangelical church in the suburbs of Charlotte. It was the kind of complex with a sanctuary that seated thousands, youth halls that echoed with arcade games, and an entire upper floor dedicated to children's ministries. On October 31st, the church hosted its annual Harvest Festival, a sanctified alternative to Halloween. No ghosts, no goblins, just candy, cakewalks, and Christian rock. My family arrived early to volunteer. My motivation was simple and selfish. First access to the Snickers barrels. After stringing up orange and black crepe paper, I slipped away to my favorite bench on the plaza, overlooking the vast parking lot. The sky was bleeding into a spectacular violet and orange sunset. I pulled out my Nintendo DS, scrolling through music, building a wall of pixels between me and the world. That's when he sat down, not next to me, but on the opposite end of the bench, leaving a polite distance. He was an older man, maybe in his late 50s, with kind eyes and the weathered hands of a tradesman. He wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans. "Beautiful evening," he said, his voice a warm, gravelly baritone. I grunted a non-committal reply, the universal language of teenagers. But he had a disarming presence. He didn't feel like a stranger. He felt like a favorite uncle you hadn't seen in years. Against my nature, I engaged. He asked about school, about the music I liked. His questions weren't prying. They were genuinely curious. "Are you new here?" I finally asked. "I haven't seen you before." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I've been coming here for years. Left for a while, though. After an incident." My teenage curiosity, always on a hair trigger, sparked. What incident? The warmth in his expression cooled. He turned his head and looked at me fully, his gaze suddenly intense, penetrating. The sunset light caught the flecks of gray in his irises. "There are some things," he said slowly, each word weighted, "that people pick up on. Things they know aren't normal. And when you feel that, you should never get curious. You should leave it alone. Some doors once opened don't close. I must have looked utterly bewildered, because his face softened. He leaned back. You'll understand when you're older. Embarrassed, I looked down at my DS, fumbling with the stylus. I looked up to ask another question, to demand an explanation. The bench was empty. I stood up, spinning around. The plaza was nearly vacant. Just a few volunteers carrying boxes in the distance. He couldn't have crossed the open lot in 3 seconds. He was just gone. A strange chill, disconnected from the autumn air, settled in my bones. I pushed it aside. A weird guy with weird advice. That was all. Months passed. A regular Sunday morning found me in the cavernous main sanctuary, waiting for the closing prayer so I could begin my weekly duty. Securing the upstairs children's wing. As the final hymn died down, Pastor Rick stepped back to the podium. Before you go, a quick prayer request, his amplified voice boomed. For the family of Robert Harlow, whose homegoing service will be here this Wednesday. 2 giant LED screens flanking the stage flickered. A photograph appeared. My breath seized in my throat. My heart stuttered, then began to hammer against my ribs. It was him. The man from the bench. The same kind eyes, the same weathered face, smiling gently from a professional portrait. Underneath, Robert Harlow, 1952 to 2009, beloved in Christ. The date of death listed was October 28th, 3 days before the Harvest Festival, before I'd spoken to him. A cold, static numbness washed over me. I stumbled out of the sanctuary as the crowd dispersed, my legs moving on autopilot. In the grand, carpeted stairwell, another volunteer, Sarah, caught my arm. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I tried to speak, but only a dry rasp came out. I shook my head and continued up to the silent, empty second floor. The children's wing was a long, straight hallway, clinically bright during the day, but now, with the classrooms dark, it felt like a tunnel. Doors lined both sides. At the very end was the Rainbow Room, its door featuring a large, square window that overlooked the hallway. I always left the blinds open on that window. The distant security light from the parking lot, filtering through it, was my only companion in the dark. Sarah confirmed. All the kids were downstairs. I started my rounds, methodically checking each classroom, turning off lights, the click of each switch echoing too loudly. The cheerful murals of Noah's Ark and David and Goliath now seemed like mocking caricatures in the gloom. As I finished the second-to-last room, a wave of pure, primal dread crashed over me. The temperature plummeted, my breath forming faint plumes in the air. The hallway ahead was dark, each dark classroom doorway a yawning mouth. The instinct was screaming, "Do not leave this room. Something is waiting." I stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the frame. Then, movement. A small, pale face peeked out from a classroom door about halfway down the hall. A child. It lingered for a few seconds, then withdrew. The fear broke. A kid was left behind. Responsibility overrode terror. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing. "It's okay. come on out. Silence. I hurried down the hall, flung open the door to that classroom, and hit the lights. It was utterly empty. No hiding places. Just tiny chairs stacked on tiny tables. The fear returned, colder and sharper. I killed the lights and backed into the hallway, my eyes darting. I needed to get to the rainbow room, to the comforting glow of that far window, and then get out. I took a step, then another. My gaze was fixed on that rectangle of dim external light at the end of the hall. It was my beacon. Then it began to dim. Not like a light going out, but as if something immense was slowly passing in front of it. A shape, the form of absolute, light-swallowing blackness. It wasn't a shadow. It was a substance, darker than the void behind my closed eyelids. Its edges seemed to writhe and shift subtly, as if made of living smoke. It filled the window, blotting out the light, until only a thin, sinister outline of gray remained around a core of perfect nothing. It was in the rainbow room, and it knew I was here. A soundless scream tore through me. I spun and ran, my shoes slapping against the carpet, hurtling down the hallway, down the stairs, taking them two at a time. I crashed into an usher at the bottom, nearly knocking us both over. Whoa, son, no running in the house of the Lord. I was gasping, tears streaking my face. Upstairs in the kids' wing, a thing, a black, Robert Harlow. He gripped my shoulders, his face a mask of concerned skepticism. You're shaking. Did you watch a scary movie last night? On the car ride home, I spilled the entire story to my parents. The man, the funeral notice, the shadow. My mother reached back and patted my knee. Honey, you have such a vivid imagination. Maybe you fell asleep on that bench and dreamed the whole first part. They didn't believe me. No one did. But I know. Robert Harlow tried to warn me. He told me not to be curious about things that aren't normal. And on that Sunday, in that empty hall, I didn't go looking for it. It was already there, and it saw me. Some doors in that holy place were already open, long before I arrived. And whatever walked through them left something behind. Something that waits in the dark, watching from the window at the end of the hall, hungry for those who are left alone. To those who wander in the shadows until the final whisper, thank you. Thank you for allowing my words to be the quiet voice in the stillness of your night. There's a strange and beautiful magic in the way we choose to explore the darkness together, isn't there? A silent pact between storyteller and listener, bound by a shared curiosity for what lies just beyond the light. I hope the tales we unraveled tonight found a home in your imagination. I hope they provided that perfect haunting shiver, the kind that reminds you you're thrillingly alive. This shared space exists because of you. Your presence transforms these narratives from mere stories into a collective, whispered experience. I will return when the clock next chimes this late hour, carrying new secrets to share. I would be honored if you chose to meet me here again.